Hey, everybody. Welcome to Reimagining Main Street, a podcast from the Spark Business Institute. I'm Laura Richards, and I'm here today with Patrick Lee, CEO of Spark Business Institute. Hi, Patrick.
Hello, Laura. Hey, everybody.
So, Patrick, today we're going to look at community building and how vibrant local economies are created through it. So, what are the parts that make up community building?
It's funny because when we started talking about this, we were like going, okay, community building versus business building or economic building, and it led to some interesting insights. But I think some of the key ones: community action, workforce development, legislative advocacy, a communal vision, maybe. I think those are some of the key pieces.
So, and there are a bunch of organizations that are already making efforts at some of this already, and we're going to be talking about some of those. So let's do that and talk about what exists and why it might not be what's needed for a true community-driven organization.
Yeah, I think this whole conversation sort of evolved around us saying that we kept looking at a gap that we felt was there, but we weren't even sure what should fill the gap, right? So we started getting creative and dissecting this to look at it and all. And I think out of the gate, when we talk community build here, we're talking about a local, buy local, economic model, right? So this is like a Main Street community. Like how does that work, right? And what exists already that should be sort of taking care of that. So we were looking at it and we said the obvious one that comes to mind is Chamber of Commerce, right? Chamber of Commerce theoretically is a geographically localized organization that's there to promote that buy local economic success. And then there's some other groups that have sort of come off of the Chambers of Commerce, B&I groups, some neighborhood associations. There's some government organizations out there that I think are making effort. And depending on where you are, depends on which of those are active or in place. But when we were looking at this, it occurred to us that chambers are the ones who sort of take on the mantle. They're the ones saying that they're kind of doing it all, right? But when we looked at it, it feels like they're primarily focused on networking. Sometimes you run into a chamber where the leadership is into some legislative advocacy, but most of the times maybe not. There's little workforce development, not a lot of community action. They're not usually taking stands on a lot of issues unless it's, a minimum wage type thing where they know all of their members would sort of support it. So they're not stepping out on the stage a little bit. And they're very much not focused in any of that. I mean, the focus really seems to be generating leads for folks, and a lot of that was in person too. So I think you can argue that the pandemic has, further eroded the relevance of chambers, and have, driven people to turn even more to online communities, social media for the networking, and maybe even those efforts at community building.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. It's true too, because a lot of times when chambers do education, but they do this kind of education that highlights one of their members. So it's kind of faux education because it's really highlighting a service that they're selling. So yeah, and there's national organizations as well that are doing business advocacy groups like NFIB, which are, member driven, public policy on a national level, oriented and lobbying mostly. So I think on a local basis, there's not a lot of awareness even by small businesses of what they're doing for them. It's very broad, very general and national policy oriented.
Yeah. And, there's some other sort of national organizations that jump into the conversation. They have local chapters and they may focus on specific regions. The Small Business Administration is one that jumps out. SCORE is another one, and they typically will offer some business development resources, but not a lot of community organizing. These are the one size fits all type of approaches, right? We have some money for you if you fit certain guidelines. Doesn't matter where you are, what it looks like, and we have some advice for you that so I think SCORE does a good job in some instances, but it's very focused. And we were talking like, where's that holistic piece?
Exactly. Yeah. And like you mentioned it when we were first opening the show, we have the online communities that are springing up. Some of them have been around for a while, but certainly the pandemic has helped these organizations to grow. And there can be strong affinity groups within these, and it can truly be a community. I belong to one called Leading Ladies, and it truly is a supportive environment where business owners can help each other with everything from who do you use for your accounting services, or what kind of software do you use for this, to actual more business to business networking. Again, there's missing those pieces of workforce development and, legislative advocacy. And they do seem to be fragmenting even further these communities, because how many things can you belong to and give relevancy to in your life? Not everything, you have to pick and choose. So in all of these things that we've just talked about, in most cases, that need of meeting all of these things in community development by one organization is not being met.
Yeah, I think there's definitely a critical gap. And I think the reason there's a critical gap is because of the definition of small business, right? It's individual entrepreneurs. And so their focus is very much hyper focused in their businesses. And we talk about this a lot. Sometimes it's really difficult to get a business owner to look up at anything beyond what's going on right in front of them, right? But what we're talking about is something that's synergistic, right? So each of those individual entrepreneurs, they have some common interests that mean that there is a community vision, a community need there, community. So if they were to look up and they were to sort of join together, right, that's when you start getting the ability to affect things beyond just the individual business. And we've talked before about how relevant that is. It's extremely relevant. And so, there is a critical gap here. And that critical gap, it relates really to the idea that you need leadership, you need vision. Okay, that it's not just if we all survive, it'll be fine. That's not the case. There comes a point where just surviving may not be enough. When 5 businesses go out on Main Street, has it taken that turn where all of a sudden Main Street's going to deteriorate and all the businesses are going to go down, right? So I don't think you can. I don't think that the entrepreneur just on their own strength of will, I'm either going to survive or I'm going to somehow lift this rock to the top of that mountain. That you're missing a component here. All these small businesses should be community. They should be moving. So I think there's a tremendous opportunity if we can identify leaders and offer them some templates of how to solve this thing, how to create sustainable, organizational, entrepreneurial ways to lead those local economic communities towards something.
Right. It sounds a lot like what we need is leadership to direct collective action, and participation. So let's look at what's gotten us here.
Well, let's look at the problems with the current chamber system. Okay, because I think chambers at one time had super relevancy, and we're kind of doing it all. But I think what kind of happened here was membership in the chamber became very much about, what am I getting? I'm spending this money. What do I get? So chambers, I think, started looking at, okay, well, what can we deliver? Like what do most of our members want, right? And they're already limited with infrastructure issues, right? They have very small staff. They probably have a director, maybe an admin, part-time admin. And, they are going to have a hard time going out and enticing individual disengaged membership who's focused, like we said, only in their business to come out. So the easiest way for them to do that is to what brings people out the most, what appeals the most. Forget this big grand vision of this local community thriving. We're simply in survival mode also as a chamber. And what do most of our members want? Well, we've seen where that goes, right? That goes to that goes to networking. That goes to basic lead generation, helping us survive. Okay. So, that whole finding doers in your community, finding the leadership that's going to look beyond that and direct it. That's the answer, but I'm not sure that it's easily in the chamber's own survival and their leaderships to do that themselves. So the community itself needs to drive the platform. They need the membership needs to say, we're looking more for this or that. And we have a chamber in our area that we actually had. You can go look them up in the podcast that was on before, and they're being very innovative, trying to do more of those things. But I think it's problematic for chambers to break the mold themselves. I think the membership has to demand more.
Yeah, and I mean, there's some fundamental reasons for that too. When you have a chamber that's run by a single director and maybe a part-time admin, the expectation that they're going to be able to be doing all of this without much active involvement from members, members need to stand up and drive, like you said, some of those things and help to make them happen. But also, if only 25% of people at a chamber event are members, there's a lacking, there isn't the support underneath the chamber to begin with to even have, the voices at the table. So I think broader participation as well as a change in initiatives could all be triggered by getting the right people and definitely way more people participating. So, but let's talk about what it should look like. If it's done well, what does this look like?
There needs to be a vision. I mean, leadership is all about vision. There needs to be a unified, understood vision. And then there needs cohesion around that. And there needs to be sort of a painting the picture, right? The reason this vision looks this way, and the reason people rally to that vision is because it's taking them somewhere. So we've got to communicate that vision. So standard leadership practice, go out there, go to those members, go to people who aren't members, begin to show what that looks like. Now, if you're in the community and you're saying, well, our chamber doesn't do that, so what do we need to do here? So now you're looking to create that cohesion. So you need to find some advocates around this. You need to paint that picture of what a thriving Main Street looks like. Why does this matter to all of you? Why do you need to take some time and look up from that hamster wheel you're on and come over here, and how will that benefit you? And then paint that picture, put it out there, and direct action. Like, okay, so what do we need to do to move closer to that? What can we rally around? That kind of thought process. I mean, we've already had podcasts around this, has already proven to work. It's during the pandemic, I think it was really interesting how, local communities rallied to save their local businesses. Okay. That sort of thinking doesn't have to be limited to moments of catastrophe, right? So, where do we find examples of this? Where can we look to see, is this being done somewhere? And I think we need to be looking to those small neighborhood organizations, to take the lead in becoming cornerstones of community, resilience and economic prosperity, and, creating that vision. You want to create a sense of place and strong bonds between community members, like each of.
We got a frozen Patrick. I happen to know how he's going to finish that sentence, so I'm going to.
These little communities is this. Did I disappear?
Yeah, let me see. You're back. So
Okay.
continue.
All right. Well, I think all I was saying was how we create the sense of place and strong bonds between community members. And what I was saying is, each of these, when we talk about main streets, each of these main street communities is unique. Every one of them has a personality. So that becomes sort of the cornerstone. So, there is one, when we were researching this, we did find one group called the Local First Movement that seemed like it was well supported and was fairly successful at executing this type of model. And I think when we looked, I think you found that Local First Arizona kind of stood out as a good example.
Yeah, so this is a nonprofit coalition of local businesses in Arizona. They're dedicated to long-term economic development through education and investing in locally owned businesses. They've been around for almost 20 years, and it's grown into the largest association of local businesses with 3,500 members and growing. So pretty impressive. Specifically, they aim to strengthen Arizona's local economy, and they're really building community accountability. And I think accountability is one of those things that if you don't have leadership, you can't have accountability. If you have strong leadership, accountability is usually tied to it. That's a big part of it.
Yep.
Why was going to say, why don't you tell us about some of the components of a good community organization like Arizona?
I think the obvious thing is the ability to make things happen, right? Some level of leverage or power or some way in which something could be accomplished. What good is, you can sit around and think about things, that's great, but can we actually make something get done? And then you need some, good organizing ability. We're talking about, leadership as a vision thing, but we also need, leadership development. We need membership development. We need the basic organizing skills to create an organization and make things happen again. And then you've got that whole political and economic education. What does affect us? How does it affect us? What can we agree on? What are the rules of engagement here, right? So that we can connect and then execute. And then you need a strategy arm. It's one thing to have, to point things out and all, but, what are we going to do about it? What's our strategy? Will it work? How are we going to get our feedback? How are we going to adapt to it? And then you got to have an ability to kind of, mobilize quickly and effectively. The worst thing that can happen when you're trying to get cohesion of members is to be ineffectual. Nobody's going to keep attending or being part of something when it can't get something done and done in a timely fashion, right? And then if you can show success in that, people are then willing to take action. They're willing to say, okay, no, you can get things done. We'll jump on, we'll help.
Yeah, that makes sense. So when we talk about community building, there aren't a lot of change agents out there. They're hard to find them. In Annapolis, we have several, unique little community business associations, like the Annapolis Design District. There's one on Maryland Avenue Association. There's SOFO, short for South Forest Drive. And these little community organizations are really focusing in a very, very local way, hyper local. They're very collaborative. They are often focused on marketing and advertising and obviously revenue generating promotion stuff. But they pool their resources. They may do some charitable stuff. And while it's important, it's not hitting enough of the pegs necessarily to really drive change in those little organizations, but they could be good places to start.
Yeah, and I think it's helpful for people to take a personal look at this, so we can sort of illustrate what we're talking about, because we found that we were doing this to ourselves. We have this conversation, we kind of know what we're talking about, or we feel like we do, but then when we're asked to be specific, right, when we're asked to say, okay, what exactly do we mean? We start sort of going, well, we'll know it when we see it, right? So we said, okay, let's explore this a little bit. What are the definitions of terms here that we need, and what are communities and what aren't they? And so we started talking, and you owned restaurants in shopping centers, and to some extent, when we started talking, the shopping center acted almost like a little community. But when we started digging into it, kind of turned out that it really wasn't. It was a faux community. And so that started helping us define what a real one looked like, because we're like, okay, well, well, it's missing that, and well, that's not what it should be. So it helped us do that. So let's talk about your specific example of when you were running those restaurants and you were dealing in those shopping centers. What was like a community? What was it? How did you behave?
Well, it's pretty interesting because I think one of the things is you feel like you're in this little bubble, right? Because the marketing firm for the landlord is, promoting the center. So its job is to drive traffic, and it's doing print ads, and it'll feature you or your neighbor, or maybe, have a Halloween parade. They're doing those kinds of things. So you're lulled into this sense of feeling like, but it's not organic. It's not real. And there's not as much, and you don't feel as vested in it, as an owner, because it's not true connection. And when you look at it to rely on it to drive your business, you have to build relationships outside of that. So I found myself going and introducing myself at schools and trying to do fundraisers. I found myself introducing myself to the Naval Academy or the hospital to develop those relationships outside of it and to become a member of the community. So they're very, calculated and not organic. I think that's really one of the biggest differences. And you're not as strongly aligned with your neighbors because you don't come together. It's not like they have a meeting of all the tenants. No, they want to keep you far away from each other and not talking to each other, so you don't find out what somebody else is paying in rent or whatever. They are not wanting you to create community there.
And you're kind of a number, right? They don't care who the individuals are as long as each of the spaces is filled, right?
Exactly. You're part of a portfolio, 100%.
So how does what you experience then stack up against what we're talking about here?
So I think when businesses are working together in the best sense, they're interwoven, their success is interwoven. It's the bookstore with the coffee shop next door type of a model. And really your success is only buoying your neighbor. So, right, it's that rising tide lifts all ships. When you're aligned like that, and you have then the community that you're tied in with, and then you have reasons that you want to support this community, and you may feel more passionate about different legislation that's going on, that you might get involved in that way, and it spills over into everything that you're doing. And it's amazing to see it when it's working, the momentum that's generated by all of these people combining their forces. And, we've talked several times about Feed Anne Arundel on this podcast, but that really was born out of the business community. It's a huge charitable thing, but it's given back to the businesses as well. And it's such an example of the type of thing that happens when good community organizing is going on.
Yeah. Yep. And I think there's a holistic way to look at this too. I mean, I think that, in your shopping center, it was nestled amongst probably 5 shopping centers that weren't too far away. And your shopping center did not care that they were competition. And if they fell, that only benefited your shopping center in their mind. Right. And when we're looking at that, in some ways that makes some sense. And in other ways,
Yeah. And in some ways it doesn't make sense at all, because obviously if it's a thriving area or more people are in the area. We're having a little issue with your sound, Patrick. So another interesting place to look at this.
I think
another interesting place to take a look at this is in the Main Street area of downtown Annapolis. There's 2 main areas to commerce in that area. There's Maryland Avenue and there's Main Street. And you would think that they would not be so symbiotic if they were like shopping centers, where you feel like there's competition there. But actually, when you're taking it from a holistic approach, Patrick, what do you see?
Well, I think it's a very different ball game there, because Main Street very much wants Maryland Avenue to succeed, and the reason for that is very simple. You've got people throughout Annapolis downtown. Like it's a place to go visit, and the more opportunities there are for people to go see different things, the more they're going to stay in the area, right? The more they're going to bounce around there. And so you want as much happening as possible, right?
Yeah. And you think in downtown Annapolis, you have so many things supporting it. You have the tourism industry, you have the Naval Academy, you have boating, all kinds of outdoor activities, hiking, and so forth. So there's lots of things that bring tourism and bring folks into the community. And by having more to offer, by having Maryland Avenue there with Main Street, you're just giving people more reasons to come. So that's how you can take a look at things that are symbiotic. It's a symbiotic relationship to have all of those businesses. Maryland Avenue doesn't see Main Street as its competition. Main Street shouldn't see Maryland Avenue as its competition. Rather, they're things that support each other on that, in that business community.
Yep. And I'm scared to talk because it may kick me off if I do.
I know. I understand. Well, so I think we've pretty much illustrated what we're trying to say here is that organic relationships work really well when building community. And even within the chambers, some chamber regions are smaller than others, but I think the smaller chambers with effective leadership could do some of the same kinds of things that we're saying you can do really well on Main Street. So I guess my call to action to everybody listening to this podcast today is think about the fact that there is a real lack of focused leadership. What can you do to change that in community building? Every community organization needs a visionary. If you can be that person or support that person, it's going to go a long way to giving you the kind of results that you're looking for. Look up, don't stay in survival mode, help be that person to rise the tide for the businesses around you. And I think we'll end right there. Thanks, everybody, to tuning in to a Reimagining Main Street podcast. I'm Laura Richards, and we're signing off today. We'll see you next week.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you.